inside of your CRM.
Meeting is being recorded.
Thank you for hitting that recording so we won't miss my intro. Super excited about this topic. We got an all-star panel here. Just a couple of reminders before we start to kick this off. So I know sometimes the chat defaults to hosts and panelists, so make sure it's set to everyone. And then we do want to make this session as interactive as possible. So we got a ton of great content to go through, but chances are you've joined this for a specific reason. Maybe you had a question that you've been dying to ask some professionals, or you're going through some challenges today. So we definitely want to hear from you. We can bring you up on stage. You can ask your question in the chat, whatever it is. But hey, Audrey, without further ado, why don't we give the audience a little sneak peek into what we're going to be talking about. So really what we wanted to talk about today, we're going to give everybody some brief intros. I know it's our favorite part, right, Sarah? We'll talk about, have you ever seen some of these problems that are going to be probably happening to you? Maybe they already are. How we identify the source of that problem, and talking about that ideal state of the CRM. So I'll kick us off. I am Arthur Castillo. I'm the Senior Manager of Field Marketing Community here at Chili Piper. I was actually a sales rep prior to moving into marketing about a year ago. So I love this topic because I can definitely tell you I probably left a ton of money and revenue on the table as a sales rep. And I'm starting to see it more and more on the marketing side, especially with the alignment from sales to marketing. So super excited to be talking about this with Daniel and Sarah. So Daniel, why don't you let the audience know a little bit more about yourself?
Cool, thanks Arthur. My name is Daniel Schutzman, Head of Revenue Operations at Mattermaid. Mattermaid, we are a B2B demand gen agency that also specializes in RevOps and paid. We work with SaaS companies that are looking to ramp their hypergrowth. And I lead our RevOps team, which specifically focuses on trying to find those gaps in your marketing and sales operations processes, marrying those things together, and really just operationalizing everything so that you can continue to scale. And I will pass things over to Sarah to intro herself.
Hello, my name is Sarah Kopis, and I'm the Director of Marketing Operations and Analytics at G2. I'm really excited for this conversation because I joined G2 and personally went through a lot of these challenges when I joined, and we are getting out of a lot of them at around 8 months since I've been here. And this is a little bit therapeutic for me, so I'm really excited to kick off the conversation.
Perfect. And I know you just talked about going through some of these problems yourself at G2 when you first joined. So why don't we start to identify maybe if the audience has gone through some of this. So chances are, as a startup, maybe a high growth startup, these problems are already happening. If not, they probably will be. And we know that a lot of companies leave revenue on the table. So curious in regards to, what problems have you seen, Daniel, and we'll get to Sarah next, that have started to lead to this?
Yeah, I think some of these are going to sound fairly simple, but they can be symptoms of a bigger problem. It's kind of like the tip of the iceberg, right? So like the first one here, UTM stop passing. Now that sounds pretty run of the mill, but it could be the first sign of a larger issue at your system level or your campaign level. So I think there's a few different ways that this could happen. One of them on the system side could be just that your system is disconnected from your ad platform, right? It could be that your team is moving so fast and everyone's trying to sprint and wear a bunch of hats, and they just posted that link on the site without remembering to add the UTM params. So it could be as simple as that. Cookies being blocked, right? Making sure you have some hidden fields to capture any kind of UTM string in the URL itself instead of relying only on that cookie. And I think the last piece I would look out for is user behavior. So if you're sending people to a landing page that maybe has too many CTAs on it, too many links, they're converting on something else and it seems like your ad didn't work, when in reality, your ad still drove them to convert, they just didn't do it in the place that you expected. And Sarah, I know you've seen a ton of this stuff at G2 and Marketo and all kinds of systems.
Yeah, absolutely. I think when I joined G2, I definitely had a few weeks of discovery, trying to get a lay of the land of what was happening. Pretty much everything here was challenges we decided to tackle early on. I think a big one that I love that you pointed out, Daniel, on this slide is routing is broken. Like, what's the point of getting a really solid demo request if you're not passing it over to a salesperson? I think that is a massive issue that so many people get challenged with, and there's not a ton of focus on it. Arthur probably felt the same way when he was in sales. Like, there's nothing worse than not getting that demo request when you get one. But everything here, I definitely have experienced in my past.
Yeah, I think overall, there's always a sense of wanting more at hypergrowth companies, right? You have benchmarks for how many MQLs you have per week, how many SQLs, et cetera, but you don't necessarily look back at what happened to the ones that came in already. Unless they affect your down funnel metrics directly, you're just focused on hitting the goals, the quota for the next week. So having routing be broken is such a big piece, because it could be so many different aspects of your operations business that's not working, right? It could be just that lead scoring is not happening correctly, workflows aren't participating the way they're supposed to in your stack, right? They might be a little bit too complex. I think what I see a lot of the time is people try to make the perfect workflow instead of making a workflow that just gets the job done. And they end up with this thing that's got spider webs and spider webs of branches, and it's probably doing the same things 4 or 5 different times until the system just doesn't really understand what it's supposed to do anymore, right? So I think focusing on what has come into your system as opposed to only focusing on getting more into your system is really the biggest key. Just understanding that you have to do more work with the leads that come in than just accept them into your system.
I love
So
that.
here at Chili Piper, we obviously talk about the routing is broken, sales isn't having conversation. So across B2B tech, we see that really that for high intent demo requests to the first meeting, at best, we see companies really only converting 40%, which said in another way, 50 to 60% of your inbound pipeline, the people that have asked to speak with sales are never getting to talk with sales or get that demo request. So a lot of money is being left just from that perspective. And funny enough, Sarah, I did experience this as a sales rep at my last company prior to Chili Piper. And I noticed we were even calling people within 5 to 10 minutes, still couldn't get a hold of them. And I happened to ask in a community, how are people solving this problem? And somebody suggested Chili Piper. I was super impressed. I actually couldn't block it. I couldn't buy it at my company. I got blocked. I guess I decided to join the company, but I think this is a huge silent killer to a lot of companies because we spend millions of dollars on getting people to our website. I always like to say somebody probably didn't wake up saying, you know what, I'd love to speak with the folks from Mattermaid. I just, or G2, that's what I'm going to do today. There's probably been some thought that has been put in prior to that they've talked to people within their company. Maybe they had a report that they really wanted to dive into and see how they could fix. So by the time they get to your website, they're further down funnel than they ever have been. And you'd think that companies would roll the red carpet, but instead taking our sweet time, maybe the routing's broken. This is UTMs are passing through, all of that can happen. So I think it's a super important one. Obviously very passionate about that because I think it's a huge issue that not a lot of companies are aware of. But now that we know these are all issues here, how do we start to find the source of that problem, right? So how do we find this guy here? And I know in high growth startups, people will join, everybody, all hands on deck, but I don't know about you two. I find that often we don't necessarily document these processes. And maybe somebody new comes in and they start to inherit all of these, the spider webs that you talked about, Daniel. So talk to us about how we're able to find the source of the problem so we can actually fix it.
Yeah, I think, if you think of your CRM as your house, right? You need an alarm system for when things are going wrong. And that's really where the active or smart list, depending on your system, the nomenclature changes, but the method is the same, which is that you need a list that's going to update itself based on certain criteria that okay, like let's say I have someone who filled out my demo form, but their lead score is less than 75. Like they should have been auto 75 at least when they filled out that form. Or they have a certain lead score and there's no MQL date attached to them, right? So just having sources where you can just quickly check and see if there's anyone enrolled on that list, that means I have a problem. I think that's the best thing you can do for yourself, is just not get to the point where you're preparing for like a QBR with your exec team or something, or one of your clients, and you realize that my reporting is broken. I have to fix this in the next 24 hours, and it's going to be a total scramble drill.
Yeah, I definitely can comment on that one. And there's nothing worse than the scramble, I would say. Definitely puts everyone into that kind of like red alert mode of, oh my gosh, I have to present these numbers. I need to get them right. I think like what's really important about this slide and what I love about it is just being the solutions-based MOPS person, right? Just being like, okay, so something's happening. How do I fix it? Let's get it done. I think for me too, like what I've learned when building MOPS teams and we work in sprints at G2 is I will always make sure that someone in our MOPS team has time to be able to dig into these things. So making sure that we have monthly and quarterly checks of different QA processes we need to run, because it's so important. Like, and I really make sure that leadership knows like this is what we found just by investing time into this. And I would say best advice is to make sure that someone on the MOPS team has time to be able to do this work, so you're not just so reactive all the time.
Sarah, that's an interesting point. Would you say, I know in your case, it's typically like marketing automation, marketing operations, but do you think that should be kind of the standard across a lot of RevOps organizations? Should sales ops be involved in this? I'm curious to hear your perspective.
100%. Yeah. I think everyone should have QA steps in their month, their quarter, whatever works for them. Like for example, if lead routing is owned by sales ops or rev ops, not marketing ops, they should be making sure that they're doing checks daily or weekly or monthly and making sure that those demo requests or those MQLs are getting to the right people. That's really important to make sure that we scope out across the entire org.
Got it. And maybe I just thought of a follow-up question that I'd love to get your thoughts on. Do you think it matters in terms of what marketing's maybe main KPIs are, in terms of if they're just like their KPIs are driving leads versus revenue? Because I've seen in some marketing orgs that they don't look farther down funnel and say, hey, you know what, the demo was booked. We're good to go. Now it's up to sales. Do you feel like that alignment of KPIs is important for marketers to start looking more down funnel?
Absolutely. I think every marketing team should be tied to dollars. Our highest KPI in marketing is pipeline. And that's pipeline that's not just stage 0, so opportunity created. It's pipeline that makes it past a BDR, SDR, and has gone to an AE as an active deal. We tie ourselves to that number because what does sales care about? Sales cares about revenue. That's what they want to do. They want to hit their quota. And so if we align ourselves to their goals, we can create stronger alignment. If you tie yourselves to MQLs, you're just going to be passing really bad MQLs and break that alignment immediately. So I recommend that every marketing team finds that dollar amount that they can tie themselves to.
Yeah, I could not agree more. I'd be interested in your take, Daniel, because I know you talked about like lead scoring, and I think obviously these are two separate things, but what are your thoughts and what are you seeing at Mattermaid?
Yeah, I think lead scoring can definitely tie into KPIs, where sometimes you might have outdated lead scoring models, around properties that don't really matter to your team anymore. Maybe you've pivoted your business, you've pivoted your ICP. And so everything's coming in and scored really low. And you don't understand why you're not passing high quality leads to sales based on scores, right? Because you've based your whole MQL model and sales handoff on that. So you have to go back and take a look at, am I driving people that are really matching our current ICP? Am I highlighting them fast enough to get them to sales quickly? Because I think the biggest way you can build trust with your sales team, make sure you stay in alignment on everything, is to pass them high quality leads. And you have the ability to decide what's high quality before they ever get to them. You just have to have those apparatuses in place and make sure that you, like Sarah said, have QA processes to make sure things are happening the way that they should, right? And I think the other piece, talking about silent killers, I think the other silent killer that I see at a ton of clients is just that the sync from their map tool to their CRM is broken. And it could be something as simple as just a pick list that was updated in Salesforce that no one on the map side knew about. So you've got 30,000 records that have hit this wall, right, where they were high quality leads ready to talk to sales. And then they hit this wall. Sales is focused on the leads that they've got, right? So they're not going to come and ask you, hey, are there any more? Right? If you're doing your job right, you're keeping them busy anyway. So it's up to you to understand that, okay, I need to make sure that on my ops side, I'm capturing everyone, they're getting the sales, and then we can figure out what to do with them if they go dark. Well, they have to get there first. The handoff has to actually happen.
Could not agree more. Okay. And again, if anybody is thinking about questions or something that Daniel or Sarah mentioned really resonated, we'd love to hear more from you or even bring you up on stage to have a discussion, maybe put a little bit more context around what you're going through today. But I know this is probably where a lot of people wanted to get to, what that ideal state of the CRM should look like. I'm sure we can hear that collective sigh of relief from all the RevOps folks on the call today and say, okay, this is what CRM heaven looks like. So I know we've talked about the problems, we've identified those potential sources of the problems. Let's give an audience a look into what that ideal state might look like and how we can stop leaving revenue on the table.
Yeah, I think I almost named this slide Know Thy Database, right? Because I think really that's what you're trying to get to, is to not only have a system that works, but one that you fully understand. And by understanding it, you understand the people that are in it. So that means you understand what a signal is for someone that's ready to be upsold, or someone who's been with you for years and has bought multiple products. That's all readily available on their contact or account record, or both. Smart lists, sending yourself reports, right? Understanding that I've got this alarm system in the background. I'm not gonna have to check it all the time. You set it, and then it comes to you, whether it's in Slack or via email. Dashboarding, you wanna be able to clearly see, because leadership doesn't have time. You might not even have time to dive into reports every single day. So if you can see on a visual trend, right? Okay, MQLs have been going steadily up, and then all of a sudden we had this crater. Something probably happened, right? You probably didn't just crater out for no reason, and it's probably an operations issue. So really it's all about just understanding how your database works, your ICP, so that everything that you've done to generate new business and new revenue, you can make repeatable for everybody, for every aspect of your organization.
Awesome. And Sarah, what does good ideal CRM state look like for you?
Oh man, that's definitely a big question. I think the big one for me, that now that we have kind of our systems and our architecture down and we have some data in our Salesforce, when I joined, it was pretty barren in terms of marketing data within our CRM. And so now it's not only about making sure that all the order of operations are processing correctly to make sure that we don't have like blank MQL dates or MQL source information, anything like that. But I think the bullet I love here the most from Daniel is the dashboards for funnel and database health actively updating. So what we do every Monday on our weekly meeting with our team is we look at conversion rates. We make sure that we understand, like, hey, is MQLs for EMEA conversions going up or down? How is it performing last week versus this week? It's really important for us to check that because it helps then our marketing managers go work with the BDRs and SDRs and help try to understand what's happening. So we're creating this constant feedback loop and like really solid alignment. So I think that's what it means to me, is not just maintaining the database and keeping it clean, but then leveraging that data to drive business decisions and build alignment between teams.
I think it's such a key point, right? Of like, okay, we've gotten everything into our CRM and it's speaking correctly, and the data is showing, but like, what are we doing about that, right? And how are we actioning that with teams? I love that our marketing team meets with the sales development team to like understand that a little bit more, maybe work on messaging. Is that kind of what they're asking the sales development team, or just like, hey, walk us through the process? Can you help us, like, or maybe even help me understand like what that meeting might even look like?
Yeah, a lot of right now, we just launched funnel. So everything is new from MQL we did have, but SAL, SQL is all new. And so the process behind each of those conversion metrics is kind of what the conversation is looking like today. It's mainly just, hey, I saw you got these MQLs. Why weren't they converted? Did you know how to do that within your Groove or whatever it is, whatever sequencing tool you use? So that's kind of what the conversation is today. I hope in a month, once we have those sorted, it's more of like, what did you like? What didn't you like? Like what was going well? What wasn't going well? And then we can look more at the program level and say, hey, this event converted really well versus, you know, this content syndication worked very poorly. So then we can kind of get more granular with the SDR, BDR leadership and just understand what we should do more of in marketing, not just from a data perspective, but from, you know, how they are really feeling about the programs and the way that marketing is working with them.
That's awesome. Sounds like I need to copy a thing or two from that meeting. Could definitely benefit. Cool. So we did want to leave some time for questions from the audience. So we'll leave that open on that end. I do have a couple of questions myself, but I don't want to hog all the time, but I'm happy to if we don't get anything from our audience here. And again, if you want to ask your question live, let us know. We can take you off mute as well. All right, maybe as we're drumming up some questions there, I wanted to ask Daniel, because I know we maybe touched on it a little bit, and just seeing some of the case studies of companies that you would work with at Mattermaid, it seems like PLG, product-led growth, is really starting to become more and more of a conversation. So I'd love to hear on your end, maybe like, I know we talked more so from a perspective of sales and marketing, but maybe for some of those product-led growth companies, what are you seeing are some of the problems of maybe alignment, what gets broken in that process? And then I'd love for you to take us through maybe what you actually did with some of those companies to get them to convert more users or whatever that might be.
Yeah, for sure. I think the biggest blocker to PLG is communication within the org. And what that means is that you're in hypergrowth mode. Everyone is trying to go fast, especially the product team, right? They are probably the most taxed of anyone. And so they're making changes on the fly. They're pushing out new versions. And so things that you had syncing into your CRM before might not be happening anymore. So what I see all the time is that people maybe were syncing 4 or 5 product fields about like user IDs, last time they logged in, how many dashboards they built, if it's like a BI tool. And those things are no longer syncing, so they feel like there's no product-led contacts in the system. So why would we waste our time with PLG? That's not how we're growing, right? We're growing from these other things, and just forget PLG. So I think what we've done to try to alleviate that is, one, build out a PQL specific score so that you have a separate path for people to convert besides just the traditional coming through your forms, but you have a specific, like, here's exactly a snapshot of how they perform in our product. Here's how many times they've logged in. Here's how many users they've invited. Are they paid or not? And having that data not only be in your CRM, but be in there actively. You know, I have some clients that were like, well, we sync it every 3 or 4 days. And that's just not fast enough, right? You have too much lag time between when someone might give you a signal versus when you can action on it. So those are really the things I'm seeing with PLG, is that it's a documentation communication issue, making sure you know exactly what's mapping, what stuff is going to your data layer on your product landing pages so that you can fire conversion tags. I see that all the time. We had a certain button name we were using or something, or we had a specific event that is no longer happening, right? And we just weren't informed. So just running the fire drill, making that happen can all be avoided by just having documentation, having a data dictionary for your business, and making sure that everyone has access to it.
Awesome. And then in terms of like, trying to think how I want to phrase this for those PLG companies. So, and I think you had like 3 or 4 case studies. They came with you with these issues. What were you seeing in terms of the lift once we did get maybe some more of that product data into the system? was also going to ask, like, does that sales motion or maybe what you're recommending to your customers change a little bit, right? Because I think the sales process is broken today. And that's why we see so much revenue being left on the table, where it almost seems like we're forcing people down our own sales process versus actually allowing buyers to buy how they want. Don't get me started on that SDR qualification call, but I know sometimes it has to happen. So maybe I'll focus on that. What would you recommend to your clients, like once they have the data figured out? Does that sales motion start to change a little bit for PLG companies?
Definitely. Once you have that data, then you can get so much more personalized with your sales outreach, because it's really based around their specific use case and not just a general pitch of here's why my product would be good for you, right? You already know they're actively using it, how they're using it, and you can provide suggestions for how they can be using it even better, even more, invite their friends to use it, etc.
Yeah, and I would note there too, like it definitely changes the marketing motion as well. Like if you have access to that data and marketing from, say, product pushing data into Salesforce, you can then say, hey, marketing is going to work on these types of freemium users and try to get them to the next stage. And then that's when we pass it over to sales. So then you can develop that idea of like a PQL, product qualified lead, or whatever you want to call it. And it, again, it's kind of like another motion that you can build alignment with.
I'm curious now, like what would be some of those signals? Is it product usage? Is it maybe like 5 users from a team just hopped on the product and then you would pass it over? Is anything you can share on that side, Sarah?
I think there's tons of ways that you can do it. Like I think the best way is to work with not only product, but sales, and kind of understand like what are those points of friction that make a good PQL, kind of like you do for an MQL, right? Like, hey, if this person is this title and they engage with an event and then they download content, is that an MQL? You could do the same thing within product and say, if this person invited one more user to the product and then they logged in 5 times in a day, does that make them a good PQL? And I honestly think it's kind of the same motion you do with an MQL, where you throw an idea out there of what you think is going to work. And then you just have to keep looking back at it and saying, you know, was that right? Were we close? Or should we go ahead and update this?
Yeah, it reminds me of what Daniel said earlier, like don't get the perfect workflow. Let's just have some hypotheses that we can test back, because I think there is often that paralysis by analysis and saying, oh, is this going to be good before we pass it over to sales? Let's just get the data and see like, hey, did those conversations go well, or were they a little too early before they actually wanted to start having that conversation?
Yeah.
And I know go ahead, sorry.
I was going to say, Arthur, just based on your background, I think you're the perfect person to ask this question to, and just in relation to the last question about working with sales. What is your best piece of advice for, you know, a marketer who's trying to build alignment with sales?
Ooh, this is a great question. I like this question because I felt like I was the sales rep trying to like align to marketing earlier on. And so maybe I'll speak to that first, then I'll talk a little bit about how I've managed to do that here on the field marketing side. So for me, I realized it really does come down to communication. There was this funny thing, and I wouldn't even be surprised if it was like a G2 intent data thing that we were using within Salesforce, but no, it was a target account little checkbox within Salesforce. And I was under the impression that if we check that, that was like our target account, that's like our own ownership. And then I was speaking with our director to manage, and she's like, no, that's actually what we use in order to kickstart like metadata ads. It's like, what the heck? Like, this is like, so the communication was way off. I'm like trying to hold on to accounts, and she's like, no, I'm sending ads out to these people. So that, to me, I think a lot of it comes down to communication. Like if we have open lines of communication, whether it's a weekly or monthly meeting, sounds like you're already having it that weekly meeting. So you can align and say, hey, these are some of the new things we want to try out. These are some of our new hypotheses. And then documenting that so you can come back and actually check and say, hey, based on our hypotheses, how did it turn out? Were we way off? I know this is somewhat in line with like lead scoring, or I guess tiering accounts, but I know for us at one point, we had our tier 1 list, we had our tier 2 list, and over time we started to realize that we actually had more of an unfair advantage of closing and winning over those tier 2 deals than our tier 1. We're like, what is going on? We have to start looking at what variables did we maybe overemphasize that we thought they were going to be good fits, and looking back at that. So I think, never let perfect get in the way of good, and done. I think that's a great tip. So let's switch over to the marketing side. I found that, I'll use a specific example. We're really trying to double down on these in-person executive dinners. So 20 to 30 people. We thought at the time conferences were still a little iffy. We didn't know if people wanted to go back. So we said, okay, people seem more comfortable meeting in smaller groups, all of that. And it did take us a while to get like our sales team on board to invite maybe prospects that they had in the funnel and our SDR teams on board. And what we realized was our ask almost seemed a little bit more self-interested than what it would look like for sales. So I was like, hey, can you help us invite people to these dinners? Crickets, like really nobody would help. And then we changed our approach by taking a screenshot. And it was like a really good list of companies, CMOs, CEOs, all of this. And then we sent that screenshot to sales and we said, hey, do you have any prospects that would love to rub elbows with these people? And all of a sudden the requests started coming in, like flooding our inbox, like, oh yeah, I have these prospects. So I think even changing the way you're requesting something from sales and getting them to see how, like, what's in it for them, or painting the picture of like, hey, would one of your prospects love to be having dinner with some of these people here? That I think really like had this light bulb moment for our sales team. So I think that's one of my tips as a marketer in terms of working with sales. How do you phrase your request in terms of they can clearly see the benefit to them, or they can start to visualize, oh yeah, if I have my prospects in line with, and we try to invite our customers to these dinners as well. And maybe those organic conversations start to happen with our best customers and our best prospects. So that was pretty neat in terms of like understanding how to work better with the sales team. But I do think it just comes down to lines of communication. If you do have regular cadences and you're speaking with your sales team on different things you're trying to try out and trial, and they're aware of them. And again, if you phrase them in a way that they know why we're doing it, hopefully to add more revenue and more opportunities to their pipeline, I think that'll go a long way with working with your sales team.
I love that. That's great advice. I've definitely seen that in my experience too, that you have to explain why it matters first before what you're asking.
Yeah.
Even with marketers, like you can just say, we need UTMs on our URLs that we send out. We need UTMs. And they're like, why? If you're like, hey, like your goals, the way that you can hit your goals is by being able to tie the pipeline that you drive back to your programs. Once they hear that, they're like, okay, I'm going to make sure I have UTMs because I need to hit my goals.
Yeah, exactly. I think if you show value, you get value back, right?
Yeah.
And the key thing for everyone to remember is that you're all judged by the same thing, which is the performance of that business. So you want to help each other out. It's going to be mutually beneficial. And the best thing to do is just, be able to talk. You don't want to be meeting the sales guys for the very first time when you need something, right? You want to have that relationship built and just be ready to lean on each other as a team.
And it reminds me of like what you mentioned earlier, Sarah, like tying yourself to revenue, because you never want to be, as a marketing team, hitting your goal and then sales misses quota by 50%. So I think like even I'd be curious if you two have any tips on, maybe you are a marketing department that is tied to leads and MQLs, of how to start having that conversation into revenue. But I feel like as soon as that happens, you do start to look more down funnel. You do start to look for those friction points and roadblocks of like, hey, what's happening here and why aren't we getting them past stage 2 or 3? So I'd be curious, maybe on the RevOps side, Daniel and Sarah, if you have any advice for other marketers that are tying themselves to leads, how to start having that conversation about tying themselves to revenue.
Yeah, I think without tying yourself to dollars, you're just kind of tying yourself to fluff, right? Because you could drive 1,000 leads, but if only 100 of them are any good, then you're not doing the business any favor. So once you tie yourself to dollars, the biggest thing I've seen to do is make sure that that data is carrying through after the sales handoff, because a lot of times I think maybe ops people have tunnel vision on the system that they control, right? So maybe they have tunnel vision on HubSpot, okay, pass it off to Salesforce. I don't really know what a Salesforce record looks like for the sales team. Like that's sales ops, they're running that. Making sure that anything that you pass through on that contact record gets associated to the opportunity and the account, and you're truly following that lead from step one to closed one, is how you can really start to tie your marketing to dollars. That's what we always try to do, is be able to visualize, here is how we started this lead, right? We had this campaign in this channel, and here's the actual return on your ad spend. Not just in terms of bodies or names in your CRM, but in terms of actual opportunities created, opportunities that were closed won.
Yeah, I would ditto that. Like, I think that's definitely key and super important. I think sometimes I know that MOPS folks have difficulty getting sales ops support on, building opportunity data or anything like that. So you can do some manual reporting in Salesforce. I've done it before. I've had access to that data, and you can just look at, the contacts that you've gotten MQLs from, and then opportunities created in the quarter. Do some janky work, and you can showcase that to your leadership team and say, like, hey, look, if we actually built the processes to get this data on the opportunity, what would we uncover? Like, my gut, based on the data analysis that I did, is that we would cover, X of like millions of dollars of pipeline. And when you tie the pipeline dollars to it, which we kind of have talked about, that's when you get leadership's ear. Like, if you put that dollar amount and they're like, ooh, millions, like, that's kind of when you can start getting marketing work on a sales ops roadmap. So I always position in that way, is like, do the grunt work, and then the result would be you likely would get some bandwidth from sales ops or whoever owns that process.
I love that. It's such a good point of like being solutions oriented, right? And like doing the work and actually saying, hey, I think if we do this, it might lead to this. And you're right, ears definitely start to perk up when that happens. So I know we're coming to the end of this. So for those of you in attendance, we have an awesome offer from our friends over at Mattermaid, where they're really going to help you identify a lot of these roadblocks that we just talked about, go through a quick audit, see if there's hidden revenue that you're leaving on the table. So I know the stat is something like 98% of us probably have our smartphone within arm's length right now. So feel free to take that out, scan this QR code, and take advantage of identifying maybe some hidden revenue that you are leaving on the table. They've worked with some awesome clients, as you can see here, and I'd highly suggest checking out the case study so you can really see in depth of some of the problems that their customers came to them with and how they were able to handle that and really increase revenue. I saw some by like 500%, so that's going to be awesome. Please take advantage of that. Otherwise, I don't know if you two, Daniel or Sarah, had any closing remarks on this topic of finding hidden revenue in your CRM.
Yeah, I think I would just say it's a pretty universal issue. No matter the size of your company, you're having something in your CRM that is not being maximized as far as getting value out of it. So I think it's never too early to start setting up guardrails and figuring out what best practice looks like for your business, because I think it is unique to all different kinds of use cases. And I just really want to say thank you to everyone for taking time out of their day to join us and talk about this. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you both for having me. I think we could talk all day about this topic, it sounds like. But yeah, this was an awesome conversation.
Awesome. Well, thank you, everybody. Keep an eye out for the follow-up email. We'll send the replay of this webinar and maybe a couple other resources that you can use for implementing tactics right away. Otherwise, thank you all again for your time, and we're looking forward to catching you on the next webinar. See you later, everybody.
Bye.